Estates, I guess, is really just starting just this month with the opening of the Whitney Biennial. I've been really interested in animals since I was quite young and spent entire summers at the zoo where I grew up in Minneapolis. So I feel like on some level I've been waiting for years and years and years to do something with animals or about animals. And I think that's probably true of everyone's work. I think your work really grows out of really deeply felt work grows out of interests that have probably been with you your whole life in some way. And you have your whole life to constantly kind of have those kind of pour out or reveal themselves in different ways. So when I was invited to be a part of the Whitney Biennial, they specifically invited me to do a project for the front of the museum, the entry in the sculpture court. And I was up in the woods in New Hampshire doing a residency at MacDowell Colony at the time, sitting in my cabin alone every day. And first getting really excited about the opportunity, and then, of course, wondering right away, like, what the hell am I going to do? And I think their first assumption was that I would do some sort of garden project. And of course, that doesn't make any sense in March in New York. And then, typically when I'm invited to do a project, I just go right away to what I'm obsessed with at that moment. And at that time, it was just animals. I've been thinking a lot about animals. And actually, on top of this, I've been invited to do about 6 or 7 museum commissions this year, one after the other, which is part of the reason I'm traveling all year, just going from place to place doing these projects. So as a way to make sense of all these various invitations and to start this new series of projects this year, I decided to make them all Animal Estates projects. So basically, there's 9 or 8 editions of Animal Estates that will be happening in different cities around the world. Each one similar in a way to the model of Edible Estates, in that each one will be very responsive to the place that I'm in. Even though in some cases I will have never been to that city before I start work on the project, it's a very kind of narrow kind of research to go into right away and find local experts. But basically the goal of the project is to make homes for animals that have either been displaced in the city where I'm working or are good cohabitants for humans in the cities that I'll be in. So for example, in New York at the Whitney Museum, the real switch in that project where I began to understand it is when I found out about this project called the Mannahatta Project by Eric Sanderson. He's been researching for 10 years the history of the island of Manhattan 400 years ago when the European settlers first arrived, what it looked like, developing a really clear picture of it, naming exactly all the flora and fauna that were here in each region so he can tell you what Times Square looked like, or in the case of the Whitney Museum, there was a stream and it was likely a site of beavers and beaver ponds. So with the Whitney Museum, I decided to make homes for 12 animals that used to live on the site of the museum 400 years ago. So in that way, I'm making fully functioning homes for animals that will idealistically in some way welcome them back to a place that they've been kicked out of, essentially. So it's really anchored by a beaver dam in the courtyard, and then a large eagle's nest up in the entry portico, and then a whole bunch of little homes for other animals. Each project that I do, the first thing I think about is, what can I do here that I can't do anywhere else? What's uniquely possible in this location? And that drives almost everything that I do. So in the case of the sculpture court at the Whitney Biennial, that's huge. It's such a particular place. It's first of all, the museum's designed by Marcel Breuer, who's had a huge influence on me. I grew up around one of his buildings in Minnesota. So there's this building that almost really feels sacred to me when you cross this bridge to get into the museum, and you're going from the world of daily banal life to almost this sort of spiritual, sacred sort of experience with art that is made very clear by this bridge across this moat, really, the sculpture court. So And it's also very similar to the front lawn, this moment where the private, sacred space of the home meets the public, kind of banal space of the street. So it's that threshold that I've been working with in a lot of ways lately anyway. So I really wanted to create a project that somehow bridged the two, had the museum come out to meet the people on the street, and conversely had the street come and meet the people in the museum. So these animal homes and the stories of them become a way to bridge those two and to have this conversation between what we think about as the kind of preciousness of the sculptural object, meeting kind of the junky quality of the stuff we have in the street, like lampposts and newspaper dispensers and benches and things like that. So, you know, the owl nest box up in a post at the corner of 75th and Madison, on one hand, is just this junky piece of wood that anyone can make at home over a weekend, but at the same time, it's part of a museum installation that has all, you know, this aura around it. So I like the idea of taking these animal homes and raising them up to the level of sculpture, but at the same time reducing them down to these elements of daily life. I'm really interested in what the public and what the audience thinks about the work and how they experience it. It's part of the project, really. It's not just a secondary thing that you make something and then you hope people like it. It's really that experience of people interacting with it is part of the whole way the idea for the work was generated. I created a project where there's the animal homes in the sunken sculpture court, and then around the perimeter at the sidewalk, there's 12 plaques, one for each 12 animals, with the animal in first person telling you about their home. So the project is really designed to be experienced from the street, from the sidewalk, not necessarily by people who are going into the museum. So I really viewed it as a project for anyone who's passing by that can get drawn into the story by these plaques and these stories by these animals. So I had the benefit of starting installation about 2 or 3 weeks before anyone else did, and it's already been installed now in place for a few weeks. So I've been really interested to see how people have experienced it, and it's really nice to sit down in the sculpture court, look up, and see these faces pop up, read the plaques, look around. You know, there's the bobcat plaque, so they look down, look for the bobcat home, and then they're looking for the bobcat to see if he's there. But the project is really generated for that sort of experience by the audience, and I'm always very aware of it.